If you work anywhere near the European financial sector, I'm sure your digital to-do list is just dominated by one huge acronym, DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act.
It feels massive, doesn't it? The perception is that everyone needs to build a completely new resilience framework from scratch.
Exactly. The deadlines are coming up, and it feels like this colossal task. But what if the blueprint for most of this was already there?
That's the fascinating part. When you really dig into the regulation, that's Regulation 2022-2554, the technical plan for a huge chunk of DORA's requirements might have been sitting on your shelf all along.
Disguised as an international standard.
Precisely. ISO IEC 27001.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to give you the efficiency shortcut. We're mapping DORA, the binding regulation, directly against that globally recognized standard, ISO 27001 for Information Security Management Systems, or an ISMS.
Yeah, we've been looking at a really detailed compliance map that shows how the DORA articles line up, clause by clause with the ISO controls.
It lets us see where your existing security work already counts, which is great news, but also where DORA mandates something very specific and new.
Especially around third parties, that's a big one.
So we're going to show you how your ISMS is really the vehicle for compliance here. Before we jump into governance, we have to thank our sponsor, www.compliancehub.wiki.
They're the ultimate source for this kind of standards analysis. I mean, the source mapping that makes this deep dive possible comes from them.
They really help bridge these complex frameworks. So let's start at the top, the foundational stuff. Governance and risk.
Right.
When you look at Articles 5 and 6 of DORA, what's the core mandate that sounds so familiar to anyone who's worked with ISO?
The fundamental requirement is that financial entities, banks, payment firms, you name it, they have to establish effective and prudent management of what they call ICT risk.
To achieve high digital operational resilience.
Exactly. And that's not a suggestion. It's a legal requirement to manage risk proactively.
Which is, that's the whole point of an ISMS, right?
It's precisely the function. ISO 27001 is all about establishing, implementing, and continually improving a system to manage risks to information. And here's the real nugget of insight.
Okay.
The EU regulatory authorities themselves, the EBA, EOPA, ESMS, they are explicitly encouraging firms to use international standards. They even cite ISO 27002 as official guidance.
Wow, that's a powerful endorsement. If the regulators are pointing you towards ISO, you know you're on the right track with that structure.
Absolutely.
But DORA is a regulation, not just a standard, so there's real accountability. What does Article 5 say about governance specifically?
It puts accountability right at the very top. The management body, the board, senior leadership, they bear the ultimate non-delegable responsibility for the entity's ICT risk.
Non-delegable, that's a key phrase.
It is. They have to define, approve, and oversee the entire framework, the policies, the budget, everything. It maps directly to ISO's emphasis on leadership and commitment.
I think that's such a critical legal shift. Historically, if IT failed, it was seen as an operational problem.
Right, an IT issue.
But under DORA, if the systems fail because of bad risk management, that's a governance failure, and the board wears it.
That's exactly right. And to back that up, Article 5 gets really prescriptive about competence. The management body has to make sure all relevant staff have the right skills. And it even requires the board members themselves to follow regular, specific training.
So the board can't just claim ignorance. They have to be educated on this stuff.
Yes. This isn't generic awareness training. It's about having the specific competence needed to make strategic risk decisions.
Okay, so that's the people. What about the process? Article 6, the ICT risk framework.
This is where that ISMS documentation structure really comes into play. The framework has to be comprehensive, sound, and well-documented. It has to cover everything.
All the assets.
All of them. Information, ICT assets, software, hardware, even the physical data centers. And it has to establish a risk tolerance level and set clear information security objectives.
Now, before we move on, we have to talk about the proportionality principle in Article 4, because this is so important for how you actually implement this.
It's a critical detail. It stops DORA from being a blunt one-size-fits-all instrument. It basically says the rules have to be implemented based on the entity's size, its risk profile, and the complexity of its services.
So a small credit union has a different burden than a global investment bank.
Exactly. And this maps perfectly to ISO's requirements to understand your organizational context and to scope your risk management properly. It means your ISMS scope has to be realistic.
That clarity is just so important for getting the project right from the start. And, this is where resources like the ones on www.compliancehub.wiki are just invaluable for clarifying these overlaps. Okay, let's move from principles to specific controls.
Let's do it.
So we have the governance, we have the risk framework. Now, protection and prevention. ISO gives you a whole catalog of controls, but DORA makes some of them non-negotiable. Where does it start to get really prescriptive?
It starts with identification in Article 8. ISO asks you to have an inventory, sure, but DORA mandates that you identify, classify, and document all ICT-supported business functions and assets.
And mapping the interdependencies.
Yes, especially for critical assets. But here's the key difference. DORA specifies that these inventories have to be updated at least yearly or right after a major change.
So no more stale inventories. That's a common failure point.
It is. Then you get to Article 9, which is the heart of operational controls, protection, and prevention.
Right.
DORA mandates continuous monitoring. The basics are there, things like access control, limiting access based on legitimate function, and it specifically requires strong authentication mechanisms.
So pushing things like multi-factor authentication from best practice into the regulatory sphere.
For critical systems, yes.
Right.
And for change management, it requires documented policies for all ICT changes, and those changes must be based on a risk assessment. But here's where DORA gets, well, surprising.
Oh.
It mandates that your network infrastructure must be designed so that it can be instantaneously severed or segmented.
Wait, instantaneously?
Instantaneously, to prevent contagion when there's an incident.
That's not a standard security control. That's an engineering requirement built for a crisis. It means you need automation ready to just kill network flows in seconds.
Exactly. It shows DORA is thinking about fast-moving, sophisticated threats. Your standard defenses aren't enough. You have to be able to stop the attack from spreading in near real time.
Wow. And then I assume it covers the basics, like patching.
Of course. Comprehensive, documented policies for patches and updates to minimize the attack surface.
And then we move to detection in Article 10.
Right? Active monitoring. You have to have mechanisms to promptly detect anomalous activities, define alert thresholds, automatic alerts, all of which aligns perfectly with ISO's monitoring controls.
Okay, so a lot of overlap there, but with some incredibly specific, resilience-focused additions.
That's a good way to put it.
So we've covered prevention, but what happens when something actually goes wrong? Let's talk crisis management. This feels like the real shift from just securing a system to making sure the business can actually survive.
You're right. Articles 11 and 12 are all about response and recovery. DORA requires a full ICT business continuity policy and the ICT response and recovery plans that go with it.
And the keystone here is the business impact analysis, the BIA.
The BIA is everything. It's the roadmap for resilience. It has to assess the potential impact of a severe disruption. It has to consider how critical functions are, look at third-party dependencies.
And based on that, it sets your recovery objectives.
Exactly. Your RTOs and RPOs for every critical function. And the regulation says your ICT assets must be designed with enough redundancy to meet those objectives. You're forced to build for impact severity, not just for cost.
And when you're actually recovering, are there specific rules for using backups?
Yes. Article 12 mandates backup policies based on data criticality. But here's the crucial control. When you restore from backup, you have to use ICT systems that are physically and logically segregated from the source system.
So you don't accidentally restore the malware right back into your live environment.
You got it. It's a guardrail to stop a persistent threat from coming back with the data.
That sounds like a pretty big investment, having a totally separate, clean environment just for restoration.
It is. And for some entities, like central securities depositories, DORA goes even further. Article 12.5 says they need at least one secondary processing site at a significant geographical distance from the primary one.
Resilience by geology. So a regional disaster like a flood or a power grid failure can't take out both sites.
That's the idea. And after the crisis, Article 13 is about learning and evolving. It mandates formal post-incident reviews after a major incident.
Which closes that continuous improvement loop from ISO.
Right, and you have to analyze the cause, see if procedures were followed, and most importantly, feed those lessons back into your risk assessment process.
Speaking of learning, Chapter 4 is all about testing. This signals that proactive validation is now a legal mandate.
This is where DORA really goes beyond a standard ISMS. The real game changer is the requirement for threat-led penetration testing, or TLBT.
We need to unpack that. How is TLPT different from a regular pen test?
A standard pen test looks for technical flaws,
Yeah.
vulnerabilities in specific systems.
Mm.
TLPT is an advanced, intelligence-driven red team exercise. It simulates a real-world threat actor trying to achieve a specific goal.
Like stealing market data or disrupting payments.
Exactly. And this testing has to be done at least every 3 years on your live production systems supporting those critical functions.
Testing on live systems, that's high stakes.
But it's the only way to prove true resilience. And the regulation is incredibly specific in Article 27 about who can even do these tests. They need to have the highest suitability, proven expertise in threat intelligence, and follow a formal ethical code. DORA wants the best of the best testing your defenses.
Okay, so if the testing chapter is about internal validation, the last big area is Chapter 5, focusing on third-party risk. This is the real tightrope for the industry right now.
It is a monumental section. Article 28 lays the foundation. Financial entities remain fully responsible for compliance, even when they outsource.
So you can't outsource the legal responsibility.
Never. If your cloud vendor has an outage that takes down your payment system, the regulator is coming for you, the bank.
So what tools does DORA give you to manage that?
First, a mandatory, always updated register of information detailing all your contractual arrangements for ICT services. You have to map all your dependencies.
And what about concentration risk? With so much reliance on just a few big cloud providers.
Article 29 forces you to assess ICT concentration risk before you sign a contract. You have to ask, can this provider be easily substituted? Are too many of our critical functions relying on them?
It changes procurement from a cost decision into an existential risk decision.
It does. And you also have to weigh the risks of complex subcontracting chains, especially with third country providers, thinking about GDPR and law enforcement in that country.
That's a huge consideration.
And then Article 30 dictates specific clauses that must be in contracts for critical functions. Things like clear service level descriptions, mandatory notifications from the provider. And this one is huge. The provider has an obligation to fully cooperate in the financial entity's TLPT.
So a critical vendor can't just say no to a red team exercise anymore.
They can't. And you, the financial entity, must retain unrestricted rights of access, inspection, and audit. But the single most important non-negotiable requirement in this whole chapter is the exit strategy.
The ultimate plan B.
It must be comprehensive, documented, and here's the key, tested, for all services supporting critical functions.
A tested exit strategy.
The goal is absolute. You have to be able to terminate that arrangement without disrupting your business, without failing compliance, and without hurting your clients. It's the very definition of vendor resilience.
Okay. This has been an incredibly detailed breakdown. So if we were to synthesize all of this for our audience, what's the core takeaway?
I think the finding is pretty clear. DORA really formalizes the best practices that are already in ISO 27001. Your asset inventory, your access controls, that's all aligned.
But it elevates them from a should do to a legally binding must do.
With real regulatory consequences for failure, yes. And there are 3 big areas where DORA really builds on top of a standard ISO certification.
Okay, what are they?
1, the absolute non-delegable role of the management body and governance. 2, the requirement for that advanced live system threat-led penetration testing.
And 3, the incredibly rigorous third-party risk management with concentration risk and those tested exit strategies.
Right. If you have an active ISO 27001 ISMS, you are maybe 70–80% of the way there. DORA just mandates the high-end resilience parts and forces you to bring your vendors fully under your resilience umbrella.
So the integration of DORA and ISO proves that compliance and security aren't separate goals anymore. They're two sides of the same resilience coin.
It forces the industry to mature.
Which leads to the final question for you, the listener. Are you treating your ISMS as a passive checklist, or are you treating it as the tested, living blueprint for digital resilience that DORA is now demanding?
It's a critical question to reflect on.
We want to thank our sponsor, www.compliancehub.wiki, for supporting this deep dive. The kind of source analysis they provide is crucial for bridging these complex standards. We really encourage you to check them out. We'll see you next time.